You signed away every dollar the moment you humiliated my mother. James's voice cracked across the silent penthouse dining room. Clara froze beside the marble bar, still holding her crystal wine glass. The family lawyer slowly closed the thick leather folder. Outside the towering windows, flashing cameras crowded the Beverly Hills driveway below. Wealth disappears quickly when respect disappears first. 12 hours earlier, the penthouse glowed beneath gold chandelier light. Waiters carried silver trays through clouds of expensive perfume and champagne. Clara Whitmore stood smiling beneath massive charity banners and camera flashes. Her white designer gown shimmered beneath every moving spotlight inside the ballroom. Then the private elevator doors quietly opened behind the crowded reception area. An older black woman stepped out wearing muddy gardening boots and denim gloves. A woven basket filled with fresh apples rested against her small frame. Several guests exchanged awkward glances and nervous smiles immediately afterward. Clara's expression hardened the second she recognized James's quiet mother, Martha Ellington. Instead of greeting her warmly, Clara laughed toward nearby investors and reporters. "Don't mind her," Clara joked loudly beside the glowing charity stage tonight. "She helps around the property whenever our gardener takes weekends off." Laughter spread softly through the crowded penthouse overlooking glittering downtown Los Angeles. Martha never defended herself or corrected Clara's humiliating introduction publicly afterward. She simply removed her worn gardening gloves beside the champagne fountain silently. James stood nearby speaking with executives from a major technology investment firm. He never noticed the pain crossing his mother's exhausted, gentle expression tonight. Martha quietly handed one apple toward a nervous young waitress beside her. The waitress whispered thanks while balancing silver trays through packed hallways carefully. Clara suddenly snapped her fingers sharply across the crowded ballroom near the staircase. Red wine stained the pointed heel of her expensive designer shoe suddenly. "Get down there and clean this immediately," Clara barked toward the trembling waitress. The frightened girl slowly kneeled beside the polished marble floor without argument afterward. Martha watched silently while nearby guests pretended not seeing anything happening there. Then Martha bent down and gently lifted the waitress back upward herself. "Never kneel for cruelty," Martha whispered softly while straightening the young girl's apron. Several nearby investors immediately stopped talking and quietly stared toward Martha afterward. One older businessman suddenly recognized Martha's face from somewhere very important before. Clara noticed the uncomfortable silence and quickly grabbed Martha's arm aggressively afterward. She dragged her through double kitchen doors beside the crowded dining hall. "You're embarrassing me tonight," Clara hissed beneath the loud ballroom music upstairs. Martha slowly reached inside her coat pocket without raising her voice once. Then she placed a small handwritten card onto the kitchen counter carefully. "Class is not something you can buy, Clara." Martha picked up her empty basket afterward and quietly walked toward the elevator. The elevator doors closed softly behind Martha without another single word afterward. Clara rolled her eyes and tossed the handwritten card into the trash immediately. Then every light inside the ballroom suddenly flickered for 3 strange seconds. Guests looked upward nervously while musicians stopped playing their expensive instruments briefly. James checked his phone and frowned beside the crowded champagne tower silently. 3 major investors canceled scheduled meetings within the next 10 minutes afterward. Clara blamed the catering company for the awkward atmosphere downstairs instead afterward. She ordered staff members to smile harder while cameras continued recording everything tonight. Meanwhile, Martha quietly sat inside a black SUV heading toward Northern California farmland. Her old flip phone rested beside several untouched apples inside the basket quietly. The driver glanced toward her through the rearview mirror once afterward nervously. "Should I contact Mr. Reeves tonight?" the driver finally asked very carefully. Martha stared silently through dark highway windows before answering his quiet question calmly. "No," Martha whispered softly. "Let them feel the silence first tonight." Back inside Beverly Hills, another problem suddenly appeared without warning around midnight. James's chief financial officer called repeatedly during the crowded fundraiser after midnight. James ignored 3 calls before finally answering beside the penthouse balcony outside. His expression immediately changed after hearing the terrified voice through speakers tonight. Federal auditors arrived unexpectedly. The nervous executive whispered through broken breathing heavily. They froze tomorrow's overseas transfers 30 minutes ago, without explanation, sir. James stepped away from nearby guests while city lights reflected across windows silently. Clara approached smiling brightly, while live-stream cameras continued surrounding wealthy donors nearby. Tell them we fixed everything, Clara whispered while adjusting James's expensive necktie carefully. We cannot look weak tonight beside these investors and reporters watching us. James ended the call without understanding why panic spread across headquarters suddenly. Then another executive quietly approached carrying printed financial reports toward James afterward. Sir, the emergency reserve account disappeared from internal records. This evening. James grabbed the papers quickly while confusion spread across his exhausted face immediately. Those reserve accounts protected payroll during legal investigations and market instability previously. Only 3 people ever controlled access to those protected emergency financial accounts. James controlled one signature. The board controlled another signature. Martha controlled the final authorization protecting everything from catastrophic financial collapse. James suddenly realized nobody contacted his mother after the humiliating fundraiser incident downstairs. Upstairs, Clara laughed loudly beside celebrity guests while expensive champagne continued flowing freely. She never noticed several investors quietly leaving before scheduled speeches even started tonight. One elderly donor paused beside the elevators while staring toward Clara silently afterward. Martha Ellington attended your fundraiser personally tonight, he said quietly before leaving. Clara forced a smile without understanding why his voice sounded almost concerned afterward. You know that woman? Clara asked while adjusting diamond bracelets beneath chandelier lighting carefully. The donor studied her face silently for several uncomfortable seconds before answering slowly. Everyone serious in venture capital knows Martha Ellington's name very well. Clara's smile weakened immediately afterward beneath growing whispers spreading across the ballroom slowly. Then James received another message from corporate legal advisors moments before midnight arrived. Urgent. Contact family attorney immediately. Internal protections have been removed. James stared frozen at the glowing screen while music echoed behind him faintly. Because somebody had just unlocked protections nobody even knew Martha quietly maintained. By sunrise, 3 black SUVs waited outside Martha's small countryside farmhouse. Men wearing expensive suits stood carefully beside muddy gravel roads. Martha stepped onto the porch carrying fresh coffee and folded newspapers. Nobody laughed at her boots now. One younger investor stood immediately when she opened the screen door. Good morning, Miss Ellington, he said while removing his sunglasses respectfully. Martha placed coffee mugs across the wooden outdoor table without ceremony. Meanwhile, Beverly Hills felt strangely empty after the fundraiser disaster. Half the penthouse staff never returned for morning shifts afterward. Several chefs quit before breakfast service even started downstairs. Clara stormed through silent hallways while unanswered phones continued ringing nearby. James barely slept after reviewing frozen account alerts throughout the entire night. His assistant arrived carrying more legal folders and compliance warnings. 3 board members resigned this morning, she whispered near his office doorway. James rubbed his exhausted eyes while staring toward downtown traffic outside. Then another detail appeared inside emergency financial records. Martha personally approved employee hardship payments during difficult years. She also prevented 2 mass layoffs nobody even knew about. Your mother protected this company more than the executive board, the assistant admitted quietly. James looked stunned hearing those words for the first time. Across California, Martha attended a small agricultural leadership conference beside local farmers and investors. State officials greeted her personally before the event even started. A younger businesswoman approached nervously holding investment proposal folders against her chest. Your scholarship program saved my family's farm last winter, she explained softly. Martha smiled and helped organize the papers she accidentally dropped. Nearby investors immediately recognized Martha and slowly gathered around her afterward. Some waited patiently hoping for introductions or short conversations. Others thanked her for helping businesses survive difficult economic seasons years earlier. One senator even paused his speech after noticing Martha enter the hall. That woman built opportunities while others chased magazine covers, he announced proudly. The entire room applauded. Martha simply lowered her eyes modestly. Back in Beverly Hills, Clara watched the conference live stream from the empty penthouse. Her expression tightened, hearing respected leaders praise Martha publicly nationwide. The same woman Clara mocked beside champagne towers now received standing ovations instead. James entered quietly and noticed the television report immediately. Neither one spoke for several uncomfortable seconds. Then the news anchor revealed another unexpected detail. Sources confirm Martha Ellington still controls several unreleased emergency authorizations connected to James Industries. James stared toward the television screen, while Clara quickly switched it off. But the damage was already done. Because suddenly the entire world respected the woman he failed protecting yesterday. Then James's assistant called again, panic shaking through her voice. "Sir, federal investigators are requesting one specific person immediately." James froze beside the dark television screen. "They are asking where Martha Ellington is right now." James arrived at the Countryside Conference 3 hours after the federal call ended. Black SUVs already lined both sides of the gravel entrance road outside. Security guards checked names before allowing vehicles onto Martha's property carefully. One guard immediately recognized James and opened the gate without hesitation afterward. "Miss Ellington has been expecting you," the guard said respectfully before stepping aside quietly. James stopped walking after hearing those words for the very first time. Nobody ever spoke about his mother with that level of authority before. Inside the conference barn, local business owners filled long wooden tables quietly afterward. Farmers, investors, attorneys, and state officials waited for Martha's presentation patiently there. The same muddy boots rested beside the stage near polished leather dress shoes. Nobody seemed bothered by them anymore. Martha stood near large financial projection screens, speaking calmly, with several executives afterward. Every person in the room listened carefully whenever she opened her mouth gently. James stayed near the back entrance watching silently beside crowded conference tables afterward. Then something happened he could not ignore anymore inside that building quietly. A billionaire real estate developer stood immediately after spotting Martha crossing the room. The man actually moved his chair for her before offering his seat respectfully. Clara once called this woman embarrassing. Now powerful people waited quietly just to speak with her. Martha finally noticed James standing near the rear hallway afterward silently. For several seconds, neither one moved toward the other inside the crowded barn. Then Martha calmly excused herself from nearby investors and approached her son quietly. "You look tired," she said softly while handing him fresh coffee afterward gently. James lowered his eyes like a child facing disappointment for the first time. "Why did nobody tell me who you really were?" he finally asked quietly. Martha smiled sadly before sitting beside him near the open barn doors silently. "Because I wanted a son," she answered calmly. "Not someone chasing powerful people constantly." Wind moved softly through distant apple trees, while cameras flashed outside the conference area. James stared toward the fields, remembering Clara mocking those same muddy boots publicly yesterday. Then another investor interrupted carefully before James could answer his mother immediately afterward. "Miss Ellington, Washington approved the emergency relief proposal this morning," the investor announced proudly. "Your signature saved over 4,000 jobs across 3 states tonight." James slowly looked back toward Martha after hearing those shocking numbers carefully. She never reacted proudly or demanded recognition from anybody around her afterward. She simply nodded and asked whether workers would receive paychecks by Friday. Nearby executives watched Martha with open admiration while writing notes quickly afterward. One younger woman whispered something quietly while passing James near the conference table. "Your mother saved my father's business during the recession," she admitted softly afterward. "Most people here would not survive without her support honestly." James suddenly understood why investigators searched desperately for Martha earlier that morning. She was not avoiding collapse. She was preventing one. Back in Beverly Hills, Clara watched financial news channels from the empty penthouse alone. Another report appeared showing Martha meeting state leaders beside national investment partners publicly. Clara slammed the remote against marble counters after hearing one sentence repeated again. "Martha Ellington remains one of America's most respected private financial strategists today." Clara immediately called James again, but he ignored every single call afterward. For the first time since their marriage began, somebody else held his full attention. Meanwhile, Martha quietly opened a sealed folder beside James near the conference hall afterward. Several pages carried federal markings and confidential legal authorizations across every document. James read the first page once before his entire expression changed completely afterward. Because the investigation threatening his company did not begin with federal auditors. It began with a complaint secretly filed under Martha Ellington's own signature. James read the complaint twice before finally lowering the folder onto the table. His hand stayed completely still afterward beside the cold coffee cups silently. Martha continued reviewing agricultural grant reports without changing her calm expression once. "You reported your own company?" James finally asked while staring toward her carefully. Martha closed another folder before answering his question in a steady voice. "I reported corruption," she replied quietly. "Your company simply happened protecting it." Outside the barn, reporters gathered beside black SUVs and satellite trucks continuously afterward. Somebody leaked Martha's presence to national financial news stations earlier that afternoon. Suddenly, every camera wanted footage of the woman nobody noticed yesterday evening. Meanwhile, federal investigators entered James Industries' headquarters carrying additional sealed legal documents silently. Several executives left the building carrying boxes before lunchtime even arrived downtown. Clara watched everything unfold through online live streams inside the nearly empty penthouse alone. Her social invitations stopped arriving after the investigation became public overnight nationwide. One charity board quietly removed Clara from an upcoming fundraising committee immediately afterward. Another luxury brand postponed their partnership campaign without offering further explanations publicly. Clara called 3 influential friends for support, but nobody answered afterward anymore. For the first time in years, silence followed her name instead of admiration. Back at the conference center, Martha stepped onto a small wooden stage quietly afterward. State officials introduced her beside governors, investors, and agricultural business leaders nationwide. Miss Ellington helped stabilize rural economies across 12 states during recession years, one official announced proudly. Applause filled the conference hall while cameras flashed around Martha continuously afterward. James watched everything from the front row beside stunned corporate attorneys silently. Then Martha began speaking without notes or teleprompters guiding her words afterward calmly. "People matter more than quarterly reports," she said into the microphone gently. "When leaders forget that truth, systems begin collapsing from inside quietly." The room immediately fell silent after hearing those simple words spoken carefully. Several executives nodded because they understood exactly what Martha truly meant afterward. James suddenly remembered dozens of aggressive business decisions Clara pushed aggressively during recent years. Cost-cutting, staff reductions, unsafe overseas partnerships, hidden political donations. Martha warned him repeatedly, but he never fully listened before tonight honestly. After the conference ended, multiple reporters surrounded Martha near the parking area afterward. Security guards opened paths while journalists shouted urgent questions from every direction nearby. "Miss Ellington, did you personally finance James Industries during its earliest years?" one reporter asked loudly. Martha paused briefly before entering her vehicle beside waiting state security officers silently. "I finance people," she answered calmly. "Not egos." Several reporters exchanged shocked looks after hearing that sharp response publicly afterward. The clip spread online within minutes across business news channels nationwide immediately. Inside Beverly Hills, Clara watched the interview replay across every major network repeatedly afterward. Then another notification appeared on her phone from the family legal office suddenly. Access to trust accounts temporarily restricted pending morality review. Clara immediately stood from the couch, while panic crossed her entire face visibly. She called Attorney Reeves repeatedly until he finally answered late that evening afterward. "There must be some mistake," Clara snapped while pacing across marble floors anxiously tonight. Reeves stayed silent for several uncomfortable seconds before answering her carefully afterward. "Miss Ellington personally approved every protection surrounding this estate," he explained calmly. "Without her authorization, nothing moves anymore." Clara suddenly realized something terrifying while staring across the massive empty penthouse silently. The mansion, the accounts, the investments. Even James's emergency authority depended on Martha's approval this entire time secretly. Then another message arrived on James's phone while driving beside Martha, afterward quietly. Internal archives recovered. Original founding agreements now accessible. James opened the attachment once before his breathing noticeably changed beside the dark highway. Because the company never legally belonged to his father's family in the first place. James barely spoke during the drive back from Northern California that evening. The founding documents rested unopened beside him across the leather seat. Martha watched rain slide across distant farmland through quiet car windows. Finally, James opened the oldest agreement inside the legal archive. His father's signature appeared near emergency loan authorizations and payroll approvals. Martha's signature appeared above every page beside operational funding guarantees. James turned another page and suddenly stopped breathing for a moment. 20 years earlier, the company nearly collapsed during its first expansion attempt. Martha covered employee payroll using land inherited from her grandmother. Another file revealed Martha secured manufacturing contracts after multiple banks rejected James's father repeatedly. Then one agreement changed everything James believed about his family's success. Martha legally owned 51% of the original parent company. His father never built the empire alone. Martha saved it before it truly existed. James leaned backward slowly while rereading the same documents again. Every success story he proudly repeated during investor conferences suddenly felt incomplete now. Why would Dad hide this from me? James finally asked quietly. Martha looked toward the rain before answering honestly. Powerful men prefer visible heroes, she replied softly. Invisible sacrifice makes them uncomfortable. Back in Beverly Hills, Clara unlocked restricted company archives using emergency credentials desperately. Financial alerts continued flooding her laptop screen while she searched through old records. Then she discovered board meeting footage from nearly 15 years earlier. Martha sat calmly beside executives discussing bankruptcy risks during a severe recession. James's father looked panicked while board members argued around the table. Then Martha outlined a recovery strategy using agricultural export partnerships nationwide. The entire room immediately stopped arguing and started taking notes instead. Clara replayed the footage twice without speaking. Another clip showed Martha negotiating labor agreements protecting thousands of workers during strikes. A former senator publicly thanked Martha for stabilizing local economies during difficult years. Clara slowly realized something deeply unsettling. James's father received the praise. James inherited the legacy. Martha carried the responsibility underneath everything the entire time. Then Clara noticed another detail, hidden inside confidential communications. Martha repeatedly rejected magazine interviews and television appearances for years. She intentionally stayed invisible while protecting the company's public image. Clara slowly closed the laptop while unease replaced her confidence completely. She once treated Martha like an embarrassing burden from another social class. Now every record suggested Martha quietly influenced powerful financial networks across the country. Meanwhile, James arrived at headquarters alongside Martha for the first time publicly. Employees immediately stood when she entered the executive floor. Some looked emotional seeing her walk through the building again. One older receptionist nearly cried while hugging Martha near the elevators. "You paid my husband's medical bills during chemotherapy," she whispered gratefully. Martha squeezed her hands gently before continuing down the hallway. James noticed something important watching employees around his mother. Nobody feared her authority. They trusted it. Then federal investigators approached Martha beside the executive conference room. One lead investigator handed her updated case files respectfully. "Miss Ellington, your records prevented millions in illegal offshore transfers," he explained carefully. "Without your evidence, this company would already face criminal seizure proceedings." James stared at Martha with completely different eyes now. She did not destroy the company. She stopped it from rotting completely. Then Attorney Reeves entered carrying another sealed folder beneath his arm. "James," he said quietly, "there is one final agreement your father never wanted you discovering." James barely touched the sealed folder during the entire following morning afterward quietly. Martha reviewed contracts beside the executive conference windows without rushing him once silently. Rain tapped softly against glass while lawyers organized confidential records across long tables. Finally, James stood and walked toward Martha near the coffee station afterward slowly. Why did you never tell me any of this? He asked quietly. Martha stirred cream into her coffee before answering him, without visible emotion afterward. You never asked difficult questions back then, she replied softly. James lowered his eyes because her answer sounded painfully true immediately afterward. Meanwhile, Clara arrived unexpectedly at headquarters wearing dark glasses and expensive heels nervously. Security guards stopped her near the executive elevators before allowing access upstairs afterward. Nobody greeted her warmly anymore inside the building she once controlled socially. Several assistants avoided eye contact while carrying files through crowded hallways quickly afterward. Clara spotted James near the conference room and hurried toward him immediately afterward. James, we need privacy right now, she whispered while grabbing his sleeve anxiously. James gently removed her hand before stepping backward beside conference tables afterward silently. That small movement hit Clara harder than any shouting ever could previously. You ignored every call yesterday, Clara said while struggling maintaining her calm expression. Everything is collapsing around us right now because of your mother. Martha looked up from the conference table but never interrupted. Clara's emotional reaction afterward. Several attorneys quietly stopped organizing files and watched the exchange carefully nearby afterward. James finally answered while keeping his voice steady and controlled throughout carefully. No, he replied quietly. Everything collapsed because we ignored her warnings repeatedly. Clara blinked slowly like she no longer recognized the man before her anymore. Yesterday, James defended her image during every uncomfortable public situation without hesitation. Today, he sounded distant, careful, almost protective toward somebody else entirely now. Clara turned toward Martha, while frustration finally cracked through her polished voice publicly. You could stop this entire investigation immediately if you wanted, Clara snapped bitterly. Martha folded one document calmly before meeting Clara's eyes across the room silently. I stopped protecting dishonesty, Martha answered quietly. That decision happened long before yesterday evening. The room fell completely silent after hearing those words spoken aloud publicly afterward. Even the attorneys avoided looking directly toward Clara for several uncomfortable seconds afterward. Then another moment shifted everything permanently inside that executive conference room quietly. A senior federal investigator entered carrying updated compliance reports beneath his arm afterward. He walked directly past Clara without acknowledging her presence once during the meeting. Instead, he extended his hand respectfully toward Martha beside the conference table afterward. Miss Ellington, your financial oversight records prevented significant legal exposure, he explained calmly. Frankly, we wish more companies had someone protecting employees this way. Clara stared frozen while the investigator thanked Martha publicly inside company headquarters afterward. Weeks earlier, Clara mocked Martha beside wealthy strangers and flashing cameras publicly tonight. Now government officials openly respected her while ignoring Clara completely beside them afterward. James noticed the humiliation crossing Clara's face, but said nothing afterward silently. Because deep down, he finally understood something painful and impossible ignoring anymore now. Martha no longer needed acceptance from people inside this building anymore personally. Everybody else already understood her value before James finally managed seeing it clearly. Clara stepped closer toward James again after most attorneys exited the conference room quietly. You cannot seriously choose her over your own wife, Clara whispered desperately afterward. James looked toward Martha reviewing documents beside federal investigators across the room silently. Then he answered without anger, hesitation, or emotional confusion, clouding his voice afterward. She never forced me choosing between truth and comfort before, he replied quietly. Clara stepped backward slowly after hearing those devastating words spoken calmly aloud afterward. For the first time since their marriage began, she lost emotional control completely tonight. Then Attorney Reeves entered holding another finalized legal document marked immediate execution afterward. He placed the papers directly before James while avoiding Clara's unsettled expression carefully afterward. Once you sign this, Reeves warned quietly, there will be no reversing what happens next. Rain covered the executive windows, while silence filled the conference room completely afterward. James stared at the final legal document resting before him quietly tonight. Clara stood across the table gripping expensive sunglasses with trembling fingers nervously afterward. Martha remained seated beside Attorney Reeves reviewing additional compliance records without emotion silently. Finally, Clara stepped toward James again despite every warning sign around her afterward. "Please tell me this is temporary," she whispered while searching his exhausted face desperately. James looked toward her slowly, but something inside him already changed permanently afterward. "Nothing about this feels temporary anymore," he answered calmly without raising his voice. Clara laughed nervously while pacing beside the dark conference windows afterward repeatedly. "You are letting your mother destroy our entire future together right now." Martha quietly closed another folder before finally speaking toward Clara directly afterward calmly. "No," Martha replied softly. "Your choices destroyed that future long before yesterday evening." Clara opened her mouth quickly, but no words arrived afterward immediately there. Because deep down, she finally understood nobody believed her version anymore tonight. James slowly removed his wedding ring while staring across the conference table silently afterward. The small movement completely changed the atmosphere inside the entire room instantly afterward. Clara noticed immediately and stepped backward like the floor disappeared beneath her suddenly. "James," she whispered quietly, "do not do this over one misunderstanding tonight." James placed the ring carefully beside the unsigned legal agreement without hesitation afterward. "You humiliated people whenever they looked powerless beside you," he replied quietly. "I just finally stopped pretending that behavior was normal anymore." Clara's eyes filled instantly, but Martha never reacted emotionally toward the scene afterward. She simply watched quietly while rain rolled down massive executive windows behind them silently. Then Clara turned toward Martha with frustration breaking through her controlled image completely afterward. "You hated me from the beginning," Clara snapped while gripping the table edge tightly. Martha slowly stood for the first time during the entire confrontation afterward calmly. Even Attorney Reeves stepped aside instinctively while Martha approached the center. Quietly afterward. "No," Martha answered gently. "I waited for kindness that never arrived instead." The room went silent again after hearing those painfully honest words spoken softly. Clara looked away first because she could not argue against the truth anymore. Then another emotional shift happened nobody inside that room could ignore afterward. Two senior executives entered carrying updated federal clearance approvals and financial restoration silently. They immediately walked past Clara and addressed Martha before anyone else inside afterward. "Miss Ellington, regulators approved your restructuring proposal this morning," one executive explained respectfully. "They specifically requested your continued oversight moving forward through recovery operations nationwide." Clara watched stunned while corporate leaders treated Martha like the company's true foundation publicly. James noticed something breaking quietly inside Clara's expression at that exact moment afterward. Not anger anymore. Not arrogance. Just fear mixed with irreversible understanding finally, settling completely tonight. She no longer controlled the room. She no longer controlled James emotionally either anymore after everything happened recently. Then James spoke one final sentence Clara never expected hearing from him publicly afterward. "You spent years protecting appearances," he said while meeting her eyes steadily tonight. "My mother spent years protecting actual people instead." Clara slowly lowered her eyes because she finally understood the difference painfully afterward. Martha picked up her coat quietly while security teams organized new transition meetings nearby afterward. Then she paused briefly beside James before heading toward the conference room exit silently. "Come home whenever you remember who you are," she told him gently afterward. James looked toward the wedding ring still resting beside legal agreements across the table silently. Clara stared at him desperately waiting for hesitation, regret, or second thoughts afterward anxiously. Instead, James reached for the final document and picked up the signing pen quietly. Then Attorney Reeves revealed one final detail before the signature touched paper permanently afterward. "Once this restructuring begins," Reeves warned carefully, "the penthouse estate will officially enter seizure proceedings tomorrow morning." 3 months later, the penthouse stood dark behind locked gates and foreclosure notices. Dust-covered marble counters where charity guests once gathered beneath expensive lights. No cameras waited outside anymore. No luxury cars lined the driveway. Clara sat alone beside massive windows overlooking downtown Los Angeles traffic at night. The same crystal wine glass rested untouched beside unpaid legal documents. She no longer wore designer gowns around empty rooms, pretending life remained unchanged. The mansion felt colder now than she ever imagined possible. Across Northern California, Martha walked through apple orchards beneath soft morning sunlight peacefully. Workers greeted her warmly while trucks carried fresh produce toward local shelters nearby. James followed beside farm employees carrying wooden harvest crates across muddy ground. His expensive suits disappeared weeks earlier after leaving corporate life behind completely. Dirt covered his boots by noon almost every day now. Nobody called him sir anymore. Strangely, he finally looked comfortable because of that. The company survived under Martha's restructuring plan and federal oversight program successfully. Thousands of employees kept healthcare and retirement protections because of her decisions. News channels praised Martha's ethical recovery strategy during financial interviews nationwide. Martha accepted none of the attention surrounding her reputation afterward. She still drove old trucks, still answered employee calls personally, still packed out. He folded the card carefully and placed it inside his jacket pocket. Outside, evening sunlight touched distant skyscrapers while moving trucks cleared the remaining furniture away. James never called Clara afterward. Clara never searched for another chance. Some endings do not arrive through revenge or screaming. Sometimes people simply lose access to the hearts that carried them quietly. That evening, Martha stood beneath apple trees watching workers laugh beside harvest trucks peacefully. She no longer needed wealthy strangers recognizing her value anymore. The people who mattered already saw her clearly long before anyone else finally did. And somewhere behind empty penthouse windows, Clara understood the cruelest truth too late. The woman she mocked beside champagne glasses was the only reason her world ever existed at all.